We're ready to forget the further, once and for all.
Trying to get help?
Nah, I'm just trying to push through.
Why didn't you drive Dalton to college? Just an idea to reconnect. I know it's been tough with you too.
I'm seeing crazy stuff. I think these drawings could be clues from my past.
There's so much you don't know.
When I was too scared to tell you the truth.
I feel like I'm getting closer to something, or something's getting closer to me.
Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. As requested, today we'll be exploring Insidious The Red Door, the fifth entry into the series, directed by Patrick Wilson and written by Scott Teems. Starring Patrick Wilson, Rose Byrne, Ty Simpkins, Andrew Astor, Sinclair Daniel, Steve Coulter, and Hiam Abbass, the newest film picks back up with the Lamberts, whose fractured relationships are opening the way for malevolence to reappear. With so many films tied to the latest entry, in this video, we're going to explore Insidious The Red Door, the entire Insidious timeline created by James Wan and Leigh Whannel, what we learn about the Further and the entities it housed, how it all ties into this film, in addition to the ending. Kicking off the Haunting series, Insidious begins with a spectral old woman lurking within a house, her ominous presence juxtaposed with the slumbering inhabitants. Our unsuspecting characters, Renee and Josh Lambert, along with their 3 children, Dalton, Foster, and infant daughter Callie, all settle into their new home, seemingly unperturbed. Here, Dalton queries Renee about the conspicuous absence of his father's childhood pictures in their family album. And while Renee's quick to brush it off as Josh's lifelong camera shyness, the real rationale lies hidden, only to be unearthed halfway through this eerie narrative.
Show me a picture when Dad was a little kid.
I wish I could, but I don't think we have any. He's really hopeless at keeping photos.
The boy's curiosity is piqued by odd sounds emanating from the attic door, and upon seeing something that terrified him, he ends up falling from a ladder. Following this unnerving episode, Dalton is put to bed and warned sternly by his mother about the attic being off limits. To their horror, the subsequent day greets the family with the puzzling case of Dalton's unresponsive state, likened to an inexplicable coma by the baffled medical staff.
Technically, yes. He's in a coma. He doesn't react to stimuli. He has no sleep-wake cycle. But there's no brain trauma or infection.
As 3 months elapse with no change, his body is brought back home, serving as the precursor to a chilling cascade of supernatural events. It's not long until the disquieting instances abound, from unsettling voices echoing through the baby monitor, the sight of a bloody handprint on Dalton's bedding, to the fleeting image of a menacing figure in the infant daughter's room. The nocturnal wanderings of comatose Dalton, as described by his younger brother Foster, add to Renee's burgeoning distress, compelling the family to relocate. Even the confines of their new home fail to provide respite, as Renee confronts a spectral boy sporting dated attire, dancing to a haunting melody. The phantom encounters then escalate in their malevolence, with Josh's mother Lorraine sharing a nightmarish dream of a disturbing figure in Dalton's room, identifying itself as a visitor and expressing its intent to claim him. The unsettling reappearance of the red-faced entity ultimately drives Lorraine to enlist the assistance of a paranormal expert friend, Elise Rayner.
I'm Josh.
I knew that. You've grown since I last saw you.
Since you last saw me?
Your mother and I have been friends a long time.
Joined by her crewmates Specs and Tucker, the family embark on an investigation that immediately sends chills down Elise's spine when she identifies the horrifying figure looming on the ceiling. Enlightening them with an unconventional theory, the psychic posits that Dalton possesses the rare power to astral project during sleep.
You see, these are people with the ability to leave their physical body and to travel to different places in astral form.
This ability allows an individual's spirit to depart from their corporeal form, venturing anywhere while leaving the physical body in a dormant, seemingly lifeless state.
The Further is a world far beyond our own, yet it's all around us. A place without time as we know it. A place not meant for the living.
Elise thinks that Dalton, unaware of this gift and considering his astral journeys as mere dreams, has ventured recklessly far into a spectral realm and is now lost in the Further. Essentially, a spiritual netherworld or astral realm, a dimension existing parallel to our own. Described by Elise as a dark realm filled with the tortured souls of the dead, the shadowy dimension as a chilling embodiment of purgatory, painted in stark hues of grey and black that truly capture a sense of ethereal dread. It's a misty void where visibility is limited, and echoes of the real world appear as ephemeral spectral residues, is one unsettling sight to behold. The inhabitants of the Further are primarily the souls of the deceased, who, for one reason or another, have not transitioned to a peaceful afterlife.
I'm looking for my son, Dalton.
These range from benign spirits who appear to be trapped in a loop, replaying moments from their life or death, malevolent spectres who harm and scare the living, to powerful demons with more sinister intentions. Each entity is unique, with distinct designs, motivations, and degrees of menace. It's also established that individuals with the ability to astral project can venture into this realm during their sleep. However, this comes with the risk of getting lost, or worse, drawing the attention of malevolent entities who might seek to possess the now vacant physical body. The rules of this realm, while somewhat vague, suggest a deep connection between fear, belief, and power. This is because malevolent entities seem to gain strength from fear and thrive in environments where their existence is acknowledged or respected, like the scene of one of their crimes. It also appears that those who enter the Further maintain some level of physicality, able to interact with the environment and its entities. It goes without saying that this purgatory-like place, a domicile for tormented souls of the deceased, is explicitly not designed for the living.
I can still hear that voice.
Among the aforementioned spectral entities, some harbor malicious intents, including the ominous old woman and the petrifying man seen earlier. The most sinister, however, is a red-faced demon with a malevolent agenda that extends beyond possession, with it desiring to inflict pain on others. At first, Josh completely disagrees with Elise's far-fetched explanation, finding the idea completely absurd. But when confronted with the chilling evidence of Dalton's drawings depicting the exact demonic figure described by Elise, Josh is taken aback. His disbelief is further shaken by Dalton's notes, which appear to corroborate Elise's account.
Help. 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 Help.
Following a tumultuous communication attempt with Dalton, where the demon and other entities vie for his body, Lorraine and Elise drop a bombshell, revealing that Josh also possessed the ability to astral project. Plagued by a malicious spirit when he was a kid, Josh's fear of taking photos is illustrated in a series of childhood photographs showing a menacing, shadowy woman creeping closer to him with each captured moment.
At first I thought it was a camera problem. And then I saw her again.
And so, as a last resort to retrieve Dalton, Elise suggests that Josh use his dormant ability to traverse into the Further. Faced with no alternative to revive his son, Josh concedes, setting the stage for a chilling rescue mission.
Is deathless because having no finite self, it stays infinite.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
The journey leads him back to their former home, where a family is murdered in cold blood by a gleefully deranged teenage girl. Shaken, Josh advances to the attic and discovers the ominous red door, depicted in Dalton's drawing. Overcoming the violent spectre that assaulted Renee, Josh boldly steps beyond the red door, finding the red-faced demon's eerie lair within the depths of the Further.
Dalton!
Daddy?
In a cavernous, unsettling room, Josh finds a distraught Dalton shackled to the floor, but when he frees the boy, their movement alerts the demon. In their desperate bid to reunite with their corporeal forms, Josh and Dalton flee the grotesque creature's domain, with the demon hot on their heels. Before the pair reawaken, Josh tells Dalton to run and confronts the spectral old woman that plagued him since he was a child, assertively driving her into the darkness.
Come back, please!
Leave me alone!
And much to the joy of everybody, Josh and Dalton then reawake moments later, with the room now devoid of spectral entities. The family begins to find solace in their reunion, with Renee, Dalton, and Lorraine exchanging tales in the kitchen. But when Josh hands Elise his childhood photos in the other room, she feels an unsettling shift in his demeanor. Noticing his hands, aged and grime-ridden, she instinctively captures a photograph of him. And, unusually enraged by the act, Josh horrifyingly pounces on Elise, strangling her to death. The house then descends into an unnerving quiet as Renee stumbles upon Elise's camera and its recent photo of the spectral old woman. Here the terrifying implication draws upon her. Not only was their spiritual guide dead, but Josh was now possessed by the very thing that had followed him since he was a child. In a post-credit scene, the screen fades to darkness, following the old woman extinguishing a candle, setting the stage for the unfolding events of Insidious Chapter 2.
Making horror films, ironically, is a lot of fun. That's why a lot of people want to do it.
Right off the bat, Leigh Whannell's script presents a masterclass in crafting tension and fear from the everyday. The dialogue is carefully balanced between normal family interactions and a growing sense of dread, while the characters feel believable, their reactions to the supernatural events grounded and convincing. The acting is a major strong point here, bolstered by a talented cast. Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne convincingly portray a couple pushed to their limits by the haunting of their son.
You've been coming home late every single night.
What choice do I have? Gotta pay Dalton's bills.
Ever since we've moved in, everything's just gone wrong.
You think our house is haunted?
I don't think it. I know it.
While Lin Shaye's portrayal of the psychic Elise is both warm and enigmatic, serving as the film's spiritual anchor.
I wasn't sure the doorbell was working. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Come on in. Mrs. Rainier?
No, Mrs. Rainier is my mother. Just call me Elise.
But in addition to the amazing performances of the children, what sells the world building is Barbara Hershey's portrayal of Lorraine, a mother that's had to keep the horrifying secret about her son's past.
You've suffered night terrors, these awful fits of pure fear.
The plot successfully subverts a number of horror cliches while embracing others in inventive ways. James Wan's direction here is meticulous, each shot engineered to maximize tension, while still keeping the audience guessing. The decision to ground the horror in the family home, a place that should symbolize safety and comfort, only adds to the pervasive unease.
When you're setting up a situation where a house is going to be haunted, you've got to be able to relate to these people before the outlandish stuff happens.
The cinematography, handled by David M. Brewer and John R. Linetti, expertly captures a sense of domestic paradise turned into a waking nightmare. Shots are composed to keep the audience on edge, often teasing the possibility of a lurking horror in the background.
We look at them and we project ourselves into their shoes. We go, that's us. What would we do if we were in that situation?
Of course, sound design is one of the true stars in Insidious. Joseph Bishara's score is a cacophonous masterpiece that amplifies the film's already palpable sense of dread. The sound effects, especially the now iconic violin screech, also take on an almost physical presence, assaulting the audience's nerves at key moments.
The movie has its own heartbeat, and the way I captured that heartbeat is through the ticking grandfather clock.
The villain, the red-faced demon, is a triumph of design and execution, embodying a primal, childlike fear, tapping into the deepest recesses of our subconscious. All of these factors contribute to Insidious being a prime example of how to do modern horror right. It takes a tried-and-true premise and breathes new life into it with inventive world-building, effective performances, and a mastery of horror aesthetics.
James and I came up with an idea that we felt we hadn't seen in horror films before, which is this idea of astral projection. Insidious is really Leigh and me harking back to the kind of classic haunted house movies that we love. The haunted house genre deals in a world where we all can relate to. We didn't want to make just a typical haunted house film. We took what people think is a haunted house film and then we spin it. There are some staples of the haunted house genre that you're almost forced to deal with when you're writing one of these films. And it just occurred to me, what if the medium wore this strange kind of World War II gas mask? Visually, that would be so striking that it would take your mind off the fact that you'd seen the seance scene many times before.
Insidious Chapter 2 throws us back to the Lambert household in 1986, where a medium named Carl seeks the aid of his friend Elise to unravel the mystery haunting Josh.
I interviewed the boy. He won't tell me anything. He's afraid.
I'm afraid too. There's something in this house. I can feel it.
After hypnotizing the boy, Elise employs a game of hot and cold to track down the spectral woman that's been stalking Josh through photographs. Her investigation leads her to a closet in Josh's room, where she receives a warning from Josh just before she's scratched on the arm. And so, left without any other option, Elise, Lorraine, and Carl unanimously decide to suppress Josh's astral projection abilities.
Do whatever you have to. Make him forget.
Seamlessly bridging the gap from the previous installment, the sequel plunges us right back into the thick of things. We find Renee being questioned about Elise's murder, with the detective's theory suggesting her husband's culpability, understandably leaving her disconcerted. Taking refuge at Lorraine's, their haven is soon tainted by more eerie happenings, from a self-playing piano to a seemingly possessed baby walker. Josh, now a vessel for the old woman, attempts to reassure her, claiming that everything is okay, but her world is quickly spiraling out of control.
Listen to me, nothing is gonna bother us. Not anymore. We have our family back. We have our son.
Amidst the day, Renee encounters a spectral lady dressed in white in their living room, who leaves her unconscious on the floor. Meanwhile, aided by Specs and Tucker, Lorraine seeks the help of Carl, the medium from their past. With his unique word dice, Carl attempts to contact Elise in the spirit realm, and their efforts yield the message Our Lady of Angels, which directs them towards a hospital. As they navigate the hospital's ICU, Lorraine unveils the story of Parker Crane, a man infamous for jumping off the roof.
Parker, what are you... You should be resting. You shouldn't be out of bed.
I just rode down in the elevator with him. He should be in bed on the monitor with fluids.
Lorraine, that patient died yesterday morning.
What?
Believing Elise was guiding them to Parker's abode, they intrude into his home, discovering a black gown, a veil, and newspaper clippings about a cross-dressing kidnapper and murderer dubbed the Dark Bride. As the chilling truth unfolds, they learn that it was not Elise, but Parker's mother who manipulated the dice. Leaving Parker's residence, Lorraine persuades an awakened Renee to drive away from Josh, revealing the ominous origins of the Dark Bride, and theorizing that the real Josh was actually marooned in the Further. Concurrently, the guys attempt to drug Josh, but their plan goes belly up with him overpowering them. Commandeering Carl's phone, Josh then sends a reassuring message to Lorraine, bringing her and Renee into an ambush. With Lorraine trapped in a closet, Josh lunges at Renee, only to be knocked unconscious by Dalton and Foster. After a scuffle, Renee and the kids retreat to the basement, barricading themselves in the laundry room. With their backs against the wall, Dalton proposes a daring plan to enter the Further, find his father's spirit, and guide him back. And so, ensuring his way back to reality, the brave Dalton clutches the canned telephone and ventures into the spectral realm, all while the possessed Josh relentlessly hammers through the wall to reach the barricaded family. In the Further, the real Josh stumbles upon Carl, and together, they find Elise in the house from the first Insidious film. After saving them from Parker's mother, enabling them to escape, Elise tells them that he and Carl need to follow Dalton's voice and return home. Using the telephone string as a guide, Carl, Josh, and Dalton ultimately find their way back. And wanting to ensure that this never happened again, Carl hypnotizes both of them to forget their astral abilities and the associated events.
Are you ready?
We're ready. Ready to forget, once and for all.
We then transition to Specs and Tucker, knocking on the door of a new residence. As they discuss the situation with the family regarding their daughter Allison, the spectre of Elise steps in, showing that she was still fighting evil after death. But the joy quickly disappears when a rising shadow behind the girl prompts Elise to exclaim in shock, hinting that this ominous entity might be the demon from the first film, in addition to the bride in black. The script takes a bold step of folding back on the first movie's timeline, but while Insidious was daring, original, innovative, and afraid to take a risk, Chapter 2 feels like a safe dive back into the Further. Patrick Wilson, back in the shoes of Josh Lambert, delivers a hauntingly nuanced performance that keeps you questioning his character's fate. Rose Byrne and Barbara Hershey continue to impress, with Byrne bringing a fragile strength to Renee, while Barbara gives her mother-in-law a strong resoluteness that lets you know she would die for her entire family. And of course, the amazing Lin Shaye's Elise functions as a tether between the normal world and the paranormal once again.
Leigh and I just started having a lot of fun in constructing the script where we started doing a lot of time traveling elements.
Like you can visit past events.
I think what they did was really look at what was scary about that first film visually and sort of take a great cue from that and put it into a storyline for this.
You saw elements of the movie in the first one, and you're not quite sure what happened in the first one, but then in number 2, you see it again, but from a different perspective.
James Wan's vision is clear and compelling, guiding the narrative through a twisted labyrinth of time and space. But everything did start to feel repetitive here. Leonetti's camera lurks around corners and through shadows, mirroring the ever-present spectral threat, while the frame is meticulously composed to maintain an undercurrent of fear, transforming familiar locales into chilling haunted landscapes.
James does such a great job of scaring people in a visceral way.
He knows the genre inside and out.
They just have a handle on that world in a very sophisticated way.
Of course, the sound design continues to play a central role in intensifying the atmosphere. Bishar's discordant composition underscores the tension, and the unsettling sound effects, though familiar by now, still trigger an instinctive sense of dread, but the law of diminishing returns begins to rear its head by the end. Insidious Chapter 2 excels in its focus on character, its attempt to link the series by showing Elise and the Lamberts were tied to the other realm, its sharp cinematography, direction, and its unrelenting musical score. But it would have been nice to see an expansion on our understanding of the further, and a different approach to the resolution, which was just a replay of the original film.
My sort of filmmaking approach is more in line with films like Stepfather, The Hands That Rock the Cradle, sort of more classical domestic thriller.
Rewinding the clock back to 2007, 3 years prior to the bone-chilling haunting of Dalton, we're introduced to Quinn Brenner, a young teenager seeking the help of Elise, who's now retired after the death of her husband Jack.
But if you're looking for a reading, unfortunately, I don't do those anymore.
I have money. I brought like $50.
No, it's not that, honey. I just can't.
Although hesitant at first, Elise eventually agrees to reach out to Lily, Quinn's late mother who passed away just a year prior. However, upon detecting an ominous and malevolent force, she cautions Quinn against making any further attempts at spiritual communication, for when you speak to the dead, they can all hear you.
If you call out to one of the dead, all of them can hear you.
Returning home, she bumps into Grace, an elderly neighbor who's lost in the haze of dementia, often murmuring bizarre cryptic phrases to Quinn, hinting at an invisible spirit. Unfortunately, after attending an audition for a prestigious performing arts school, the following day, Quinn is distracted by a mysterious figure waving at her in the distance, resulting in her getting hit by a car and fracturing both her legs. Confined to her home, the girl shares the apartment with her father Sean and younger brother Alex. It's not long until the domestic quietude is quickly shattered by escalating paranormal activity, most hauntingly marked by visions of a sinister entity with an oxygen mask, dubbed the Man Who Can't Breathe. Quinn eventually realizes the spectral figure is the very one responsible for her accident. The discovery also coincides with the sad passing of Grace, who was the only other person actually aware of what was going on. As things begin to escalate at home, Sean begs Elise to help out of desperation, who herself is grappling with the grief of losing her husband.
Loving someone is just delayed pain, isn't it? Eventually, you're going to lose them one way or the other.
Haunted by her past ventures into the further, Elise initially declines, revealing how she was being pursued by the Dark Bride. But it's an encouraging push from her former colleague and good friend Carl that finally convinces Elise to continue helping. Carl essentially reminds Elise of how she'd helped Josh Lambert in 1986, and of the simple yet powerful fact that she holds an advantage over the spirits. She's alive and therefore stronger.
If someone gets attacked by a person on the street, they can go to the police. If they're attacked by something they can't see, they only have people like us to go to.
Following Elise's initial reluctance, Alex encourages Sean to seek the help from a pair of internet celebrity demonologists, Specs and Tucker. However, their investigation spirals out of control, with the Man Who Can't Breathe taking over half of Quinn's soul.
You're a useless father. Your wife had to die to get away from you. And now I'd rather be dead too. But I'm gonna keep you alive to watch you suffer.
After discerning the spirit aimed to ensnare innocent souls into the further to drain their life force, Elise resolves to traverse the spectral realm herself, aided by Specs and Tucker.
This is how you die. Not today, it isn't.
Once inside, she briefly fights the bride in black before stumbling upon what seems to be the spirit of her late husband. Jack nudges Elise to take her own life, promising they'd be reunited in death, but this actually prompts her to realize that it's the man who can't breathe taking his form.
Give me the girl now or I'll do a whole lot worse.
Commanding the deceptive spirit to release Quinn, Elise enters into a heated struggle with the dark entity over her soul. But it's not until she's forced to escape the further that Elise realizes Quinn must rescue herself. This was confusing to me, as both Josh and Dalton, who had the same astral projection powers as Elise, all needed someone to come in and guide them out. While Quinn doesn't have these powers, she merely summoned the entity by trying to communicate with her mother. Regardless, though the girl is outmatched, Elise is able to summon the spirit of Lily, who empowers Quinn to wrench off the breathing mask of the man who can't breathe, seemingly suffocating and eradicating him. Back in the real world, Quinn is finally free from the grasp of the further, and before leaving, Elise gives some parting words to the family, filled with heartening sentiments from Lily's spirit. Leaving in the company of Specs and Tucker, we see Elise form the ghost-busting alliance we'd see 3 years later.
Maybe we should go into business together.
Thought you said this business was too dangerous for you.
Yeah, well, everybody's gonna die one day.
In an eerie conclusion, however, Elise's dog growls at an invisible presence that night. And unseen to Elise, the red-faced demon also watches her from the shadows. Having taken over directing duties from James Wan, Whannel offers us an entry that tries its best to set up some backstory for our paranormal protagonist Elise. While the dialogue veers between passable and predictable, it's the clunky plotting and characterization that gets a bit murky here. There's the cliché-tormented psychic, the grief-stricken father-daughter duo, our undercooked antagonist who doesn't quite hit the high spectral notes, and a writer-director with a proclivity to make meta-jokes about his role in the previous films.
What's your contribution?
This should be good. It's not good, it's great. It's our blog. I'm the writer of it.
No matter what happens, no matter what you see. What? Okay, could you just maybe write it down and try not to talk?
The acting was okay, given what they had to work with in the script, but you can definitely see a reduction in the overall quality. Lynn Shay reprises her role as Elise and does a commendable job, and while stumbling in the opening few minutes, Stephanie Scott brings a decent emotional resonance to her imperiled Quinn. However, Dermot Mulroney as the father can feel a bit stiff in places, not completely selling the emotional depth of his character, while the younger brother Alex is only on screen for a few minutes. Although Elise is given her fair due, when it comes to Tucker and Specs, they're relegated to comic relief. It just would have been nice to learn more about the characters we're seeing for the third time.
What's great about Specs and Tucker is Specs and Tucker. Leigh has created this friendship between the two guys that is so delicious and so real.
Whannell's directing leans into the franchise's stylistic comfort zone with its eerie lighting and lingering, tension-filled shots. However, while competently handled, it does lack some of the more inventive directorial flair and focus on family that we'd seen in One's hands in previous chapters.
Real life scares me. I'd like to retreat from that world by writing films about demons that are trying to kill people, which is my happy place.
The sound design, once a staple of the series, is a mixed bag. A blend of whispers, creaking doors, and sudden jolts of orchestral menace that don't always match what's on screen. At its best, it crafts an eerie ambience. At its worst, it feels a little too reliant on horror motifs that were mastered in its predecessors. The Man Who Can't Breathe brings some skin-crawling moments. However, he's not as memorable or fleshed out as his predecessors, with his motivation and connection to the protagonist lacking the depth and nuance of the bride and lipstick demon.
James had a distinctive style to his ghosts. When I was thinking about what would be different about this chapter, I was thinking that the ghost could be horrendous and sickly in a way.
It's not just the techniques and aesthetics getting a bit too repetitive, but without much effort to expand on the mythology, it really felt like Whannell didn't know what to do with the third film in the series.
What we love about the Insidious universe is we truly go for the unexpected scare. We don't want any of the scares to be expected, like, oh, I can see this coming.
Opening to a flashback in 1953, we find a young Elise, her brother Christian, and her parents Audrey and Gerald living near a prison in New Mexico, where her father worked as a grim executioner. While her mother Audrey nurtured the gift that she had, when Elise reveals that she was privy to intimate details about a prisoner that was just executed. Gerald punished her for what he thought were lies.
Did you see a ghost?
Yes, I did. They're all around us in this house. They're everywhere.
And as the kids are startled by an apparition, Gerald ends up locking her in the basement, much to the protest of his wife and daughter. There, she's lured by a childlike voice of a demon behind a red door, compelling her to retrieve a hanging key. This key, once added to the demon's finger-keyed hand, leads to the demonic possession of Elise, shaking the house violently. The turbulence draws Audrey to the basement, where she's strangled by a descending wire out of Evil Dead. Jolted awake from the nightmare, we find an older Elise now working as a paranormal investigator, alongside her team, Specs and Tucker. The following story effectively takes place after Chapter 3, but before the first film, where Elise met her tragic end.
I need help. Here's the thing, see?
May I ask where you live?
Apple Tree Road, 5 Keys, New Mexico.
When the current occupant of her childhood home, Ted Garter, contacts her about unusual paranormal activities, Elise is initially hesitant, but decides to confront her past and agrees to help.
My whole life savings is in this place. You gotta help me. You gotta help me, please.
That's what we do.
Back in New Mexico, she delves into the house's haunting mysteries with Ted, who notes the high frequency of paranormal incidents, particularly in her old room, which he now barricaded. And during an exploration that night, Elise unearths Christian's long-lost whistle, gifted to him by his mother, and a set of keys attached to her father's old uniform.
I thought you were gone forever.
My mother got this from my brother, and he lost it when he was 6 years old.
A mysterious noise lures her to the basement, where a female ghost, visible only to her, startles Elise by snatching the whistle and pleading for help. This apparition is familiar to Elise, triggering a flashback to her teenage years when she first encountered it.
Help her! What's your name? Stop it. You're making it up. Come out and see my brother. He doesn't believe that you're here.
Christian! We learned that when she and Kristen were tidying the house, she'd heard an uncanny noise from the laundry room. While she'd come face to face with a female spectre, despite also being present, Gerald and Christian were oblivious to its presence. When her father approaches, in an attempt to protect herself from his fury, she touches his face, foreseeing his future death by heart attack, and, understandably overwhelmed, she ran away, leaving her family behind.
I won't let you hurt me anymore.
Back in the present, while at a local cafe, Elise encounters two women, Imogen and Melissa, revealed to be the daughters of her brother. While Specs and Tucker take a liking to them, the reunion takes a bitter turn with Christian arriving and confronting Elise, berating her for abandoning him with their tyrant father. Unable to sway his resentment, Elise hands a photo of his whistle to Melissa, imploring her to pass it on to him as a token of contrition.
When we were children, you terrified me with stories about a monster, a red door, and then you opened the door and you left.
Christian! Christian!
I'm sorry. He can be unreasonable sometimes.
Knowing what he grew up with, that's perfectly understandable.
Here you go.
You give this to your dad. You tell him it was taken yesterday in our old bedroom. Oh, I think he will be very surprised to see it.
During their investigation later that night, Elise and Tucker are led by the sound of the whistle to a concealed section of the basement. Upon inquiry, Elise discerns that what she was after lay behind a sealed wall, and so, guided by her instincts, she fetches the key and opens the hidden door, discovering a captive girl named Mara behind it. Unfortunately, the discovery triggers Ted's wrath, who was now under Keyface's influence.
Why'd you have to come down here?
Why?
Your ghost let us down here.
He's in my head.
After locking Elise and Tucker in with Mara, Ted proceeds upstairs to eliminate Specs, but suffers from death by bookcase during the struggle. Of course, with the rescued captive puzzling the police, they open an inquiry and begin questioning them about the bizarre events leading up to the discovery. But while at the police station, Elise spots an apparition and realizes that Christian and his daughters return to their old home in search of the whistle. At the same time, Melissa is lured into the basement, where her soul is taken to the further by Keyface. Arriving on scene, Elise finds an unconscious Melissa in the cellar room, prompting her to vow to retrieve her soul. It's here that Imogen confesses her own astral projection ability and offers to assist Elise. And so, joined by Tucker, Elise prepares to enter the further through the red door, while Imogen and Specs look for more clues. As our psychic entered the exhaust vent, she uncovers a gown belonging to Anna, the ghost she met as a teenager. Elise is then thrown into a memory and realizes that Anna was alive during their first encounter, kept as a captive in the same hidden room by her father.
Time to sleep!
Let me go! I promise I won't.
We also learn that Gerald's violence had extended to many other victims. However, in the midst of this revelation, Keyface assaults her, dragging Elise into the further, where she's forced to relive the trauma of her childhood.
Where am I?
You're in a special place.
Who are you?
I'm a friend.
Daddy doesn't mean it when he yells at me. He's scared of the man with the keys. He's the one controlling it all.
Meanwhile, Imogen braves her maiden voyage into the further, guided by Anna. And though unable to venture beyond the red door at first, Anna empowers her with a whistle.
This is the place.
Trapped within a grim replay of her past, Elise observes her father succumbing to the insidious influence of the malevolent entity, in the same way that Ted would later be corrupted. Presented with an opportunity for revenge by Keyface, she's handed a cane to inflict punishment on her father. Luckily, Imogen's timely intervention breaks her free, and so, boldly defying Keyface, Elise refuses to nurture the hatred that feeds it, effectively snapping the cane.
I am not gonna feed you with hatred anymore, demon. You can fucking starve!
With Melissa teetering on the brink of death, Imogen gives Elise the whistle, enabling her to summon her mother's help and ultimately defeat the entity.
Hands off my little girl.
Finally returning to reality, Elise and Imogen rush to the hospital for a heartfelt reunion with Melissa and Christian. In this cathartic moment, Christian absolves Elise for her past mistakes, and she gives him the whistle. The tender reconciliation culminates in a familial embrace before Elise returns to her home in California.
I always thought that I was afraid of dying, but now I realize that I wasn't. I was afraid of dying before I truly had a family again.
However, Elise is then startled awake by a disturbing premonition of Dalton and the menacing red-faced demon looming over him. A timely phone call from Lorraine then interrupts her, and accepting the urgent plea for help, Elise assures her that she'll be there the following morning, connecting us directly to the first film.
Oh, Dalton.
Leigh Whannell's script shows some wear here, falling into the age-old trap of confusing, convoluted backstory with compelling character development. The dialogue frequently oscillates between overwrought exposition and contrived jump scare setups. The characters themselves are mostly familiar tropes, and while they serve their purpose, they don't particularly invite a strong emotional investment.
I would say that this film really explores Lynn's character, Elise. You know, in the first film, she was kind of a supporting character that came in the third act to save the day.
I mean, for me as the actor, it was a real thrill to fill in those empty spaces about what made me become the person I become.
On the acting front, Lynn Shay once again returns as Elise, the psychic heart of the series, delivering a committed performance despite the script's limitations. Her interactions with Angus Sampson and Whannell, who reprised their roles as the bumbling Ghostbusters, Tucker and Specs, provide a few lighter moments amidst the gloom. But the rest of the cast is serviceable without being remarkable, with a few performances straying into melodramatic territory. As a director, Adam Robitel largely adheres to the franchise's established stylistic formula. He effectively conjures an unsettling atmosphere, but it doesn't hit the heights of the best moments in the series, and it's lacking the more creative visual flourishes that previous entries brought to the table.
It's a more important movie, I think, than just a genre film. It tackles huge ideas of abuse and forgiveness.
Cinematography, helmed by Toby Oliver, is solid, maintaining the series' love for low light, stark contrasts and creeping camera movements. It's competently done, but there's little in the way of standout visual storytelling. The sound design is also fairly standard. The franchise's trademark blend of sudden, jarring sound effects and hushed, suspense-building ambient noises are both present, but their impact has diminished significantly.
Leigh is really a gifted writer, actor,
Mhm.
and a director. He directed the third one, and we had another
I told
gifted
you to say
director.
directed it brilliantly.
Directed it brilliantly in the third one.
When it comes to character and world building, The Last Key takes us deeper into Elisa's backstory, revealing that she had a brother and 2 nieces. It also gives us more of Specs and Tucker, but again, like Chapter 3, it doesn't really expand the universe in any meaningful way. The demon Keyface has some genuinely creepy moments, but the entity's motivations are as murky as its preferred lighting, and sadly, its design doesn't quite live up to the terror evoked by the red-faced demon and the Dark Bride.
And as usual, the team at Fractured has really gone all out and given us our most unique-looking demon yet.
With all that said, the conclusion wraps up Elisa's personal journey in a sentimental bow, but while offering a few genuine scares and an intriguing, if underdeveloped villain, Insidious: The Last Key felt like the series was stretching its concept thin.
It's almost like a chef making a dish. You just want a little sprig of comedy. You know, you want the film to be scary. My character, we're really there to provide the occasional comic relief.
The Red Door begins at the end of Chapter 2, with Dalton and Josh getting their memories of the further wiped clean to protect their family. We're then transported 9 years ahead to Lorraine's funeral, where a divided Lambert household are paying their respect. Dalton, now a week away from college, reads an impassioned eulogy before his parents talk about the next few weeks and Josh potentially spending more time with the kids. While they managed to overcome the supernatural by forgetting, gaps in his memory led to Josh losing a part of himself. He's now forgetful and slightly detached, despite his love for the family, and although being understandably traumatized by the fact that he literally tried to murder all of them while he was possessed, and that he was now more absent than ever. Renee does her best to encourage him to spend more time with the kids, but it's clear that something is not right in his head. Feeling abandoned by him, Dalton has also begun to harbor deep resentment for his father. But before any reconciliation could be made, as his family and friends drove off, noticing Carl walk away in the distance, Josh decides to approach him, asking who he was. Telling him his name was Carl, which seems to trigger a bell in Josh's mind, and explaining he was a friend of his mother that lost touch, Carl tells him that death floods the mind with memory, but that there were always new ones to make. Like a splinter in his mind, the frustration of believing he knew the man leads the father to start questioning his past. As he texted Dalton, suggesting he drove him to college next week, we see a menacing figure approach the car from the back that disappears when Dalton agrees.
Our family has been through a lot together.
You told me that when I was 10. I was in a coma, but I don't remember being sick.
When Josh drives Dalton to his liberal arts school the following week, the mood is tense, with his father trying to make conversation as Dalton did his best to hide his frustration. Arriving at the college, we meet his new roommate, a girl named Chris Winslow, making them realize there was a mix-up with the rooms. As she left to sort it out, Dalton begins putting up drawings and artwork, which include his siblings Renee and Lorraine, but not Josh. Helping him set up his room and attempting to give him some advice on how to settle in, Josh discovers that Dalton still needed a nightlight. The boy tries to hint to the fact that Lorraine and Renee have been hiding stuff from them, but this flies over his father's head, who merely tells him that their mothers have had a lot to deal with. Here, Josh begins apologizing for being absent over the last few years, stating that his mind had been really foggy. Dalton suggests he get some help, but when his father jokes that it could have been much worse considering his own father was absent for most of his life, this triggers more resentment from Dalton. And frustrated by his inability to connect with him, Josh calls his son an ungrateful shit, causing Dalton to spitefully say that he understood why his mother left him. The extremely painful scene for both the father and son is well acted and scripted. We can tell that they both want reconciliation, but keep saying the wrong words, continuing the feud. With Chris telling Dalton that she got administration to change her room the following day, the pair get to know each other by stating all the weird things about themselves. Although they begin with quirky characteristics, things get serious when she tells him her parents died when she was 10, forcing her to live with her grandparents. This leads Dalton to also open up and reveal that he doesn't remember being 10. Claiming to have lost a year to viral meningitis, he hints at not believing what his family told him. It's important to note that while Dalton is an introvert, reserved, quiet, and wanting to stick to himself, Chris is the opposite, outgoing, loud, and boisterous, helping him come out of his shell. And although they end up staying in different dorms after that night, their burgeoning friendship becomes pivotal to his journey. The talented artist then begins his first class with the ruthless Professor Armagon. Her teaching style leans heavily on the merciless side, demonstrated when she demands a student rip up his art piece, deeming it too simplistic, a recreation without soul. Offended by the demand and protesting by exclaiming how much time he spent on it, the guy is dismissed from the class as a failure, the lesson here being that he would not learn anything if he could not accept his flaws. Dalton then begins tearing up the drawing he made of Lorraine, causing Armageddon to surprisingly protest by saying it was beautiful, considering the passion he put into it and how strongly he felt about Lorraine. Still admiring his initiative and militant obedience, the professor counts backwards and instructs the class to dig deep into their memories for their next drawing. Unfortunately, this triggers Dalton's memories of the further, leading him to draw a door before a demon hand pushes against his, causing him to bleed on the painting. This also appears to awaken something in Josh, who sees an image of the red door, leading him to go get an MRI scan. Here, reality begins to blur as the room's lights go out. His calls for help are then answered not by the medical staff, but a demonic figure in hospital garb that tells him the door is open before crawling towards him. Panicking, he's abruptly pulled back into reality by the doctor, who informs him he went to sleep for 15 minutes. Not only that, but the scan was successful, ultimately revealing no irregularities on the brain. While the test showed no answers, the doctor tells him that his issues could be the result of stress, and with Josh recently having lost his mother, in addition to being separated from his entire family, it's implied that these could be the contributing factors. Still, just to be sure, he recommends he check the mental history of his family to see if there were any hereditary problems that could explain what was happening to him. On the college front, after he's attacked by another phantom, Dalton and Chris are thrust into a fraternity party. A daring venture into the room of a frat boy named Nick results in Dalton plunging back into the further, where he encounters a spectre of a fraternity pledge that died from a hazing mishap, pleading with Dalton to shut the door. When Nick arrives back in his room, a quick-thinking Chris initiates a kiss to cover their intrusion, but when Nick insults her, she kicks him in the groin, forcing the pair to make a hasty retreat. It's not until later that night that Dalton's sleep finally leads him to astral project back into the further once again, and alerted to his presence in their room, Chris learns of his visions and the weird power he had. Dalton tries to explain how his painting of the door, now red and with a distorted figure in front of it wielding a hammer, was tied to his dreamlike voyages. And with Chris deciding to stick by him, their surreal experiences lead them to investigate astral projection on the internet, where they unearth YouTube videos from Tucker, Specs, and Elise, whom Dalton has a faint recollection of. At the same time, his father's engaging in memory exercises, surrounding himself with photos of loved ones to see if it unlocked any memories. But before he can make any progress, the figure from the cemetery crashes through his window and seemingly attacks him. With his astral projection also beginning to manifest, he's then transported to the further for a split second before he comes back and uncovers a box marked Ben Burton, revealing a past he didn't know. Turns out, the former mental patient who took his life was in fact Josh's estranged father, who, like him and Dalton, could astral project. This revelation provides a bit of context for why their lives have been marred with inexplicable terrors. It also explains that the man that keeps haunting him is actually his own father. A note discovered on the back of one of the family photos eerily reads, "This ends with me," hinting at Ben's misguided belief that his suicide would shield his family from the entities in the further. Meanwhile, Chris and Dalton's audacious return to Nick's room for another astral projection session takes a malevolent twist. Despite the warning Elise gives in the video they found about how the dead craved life, the boy is completely unaware of the danger he was now in. Of course, it's not long until a demonic entity assaults Dalton in the further, paralleled by Chris's attack in the physical world. Entering his room, Nick stumbles upon an unconscious Chris and brings her back round, but understandably terrified by everything that was happening, she decides she can no longer help Dalton in this perilous journey. Trying to piece it all together, Dalton even messages his younger brother Foster, asking if he can help fill in the blanks of what happened during his coma, but his brother merely tells him to speak to their mother. Also compelled to solve the other half of the mystery and discuss how he'd failed as a father, Josh visits Renee and tells her about what happened to Ben. The conversation is extremely tense, with Renee trying her best to keep everything bottled up, but when they begin discussing their divorce and he tells her that he's worried he'd cursed his family, his ex-wife reveals what happened that year. She tells him that Josh, possessed by the Dark Bride, had attacked their entire family with a hammer, a chilling memory that Dalton had captured in the drawing of the Red Door. Though he and Dalton forgot it all and Callie was too young to remember, she had to lie to Foster for years in addition to herself. The secret had effectively torn them all apart. It's not until Dalton contacts Foster once again that his younger brother reveals he had a twisted memory of them being chased by Josh's children. In a magnetically intense scene, Dalton, almost possessed by the paintbrush itself, continues to fill in the details of the drawing while breaking down at the realization of what his father had done. Simultaneously, he relives the terrifying memory of his father's attack and his horrifying experiences in the further as a demon takes control of his body, hoping to attack Chris again. Foster then receives a photo of the drawing from the possessed Dalton, immediately recognizing his father as the hammer wielder, and realizing that Dalton was in grave danger. With the help of Renee and Foster, Josh astral projects back into the further to rescue his son. While he does find him and they manage to run away, the sinister red-faced demon who had dominion over the Dark Realm pursues them once more. It turns out that all the apparitions they'd been seeing, from Ben to the deceased frat boy, were actually helping them, trying to advise them to keep the Red Door closed. As they exit the Red Door, the metaphysical gateway between Earth and the Further, Josh finally listens, choosing to stay back and hold it closed, believing it was his responsibility to put an end to the ongoing terror. Although his father Ben had been alone, with no one to help him, before the red-faced demon breaks through the door to claim Josh, in the physical world, Dalton simply paints over the door, resulting in its disappearance. With the demon now trapped in the Further, we get a sweet moment of relief as the ghost of Ben becomes the light Josh needed to find his way back. Awakening to a relieved Renee and Foster, Josh comes back, stronger and more mentally fortified than ever. At the same time, Dalton and Chris stand united as great friends that have been to hell and back. Hints of reconciliation also begin to seep into Josh and Renee's relationship, suggesting a possible reunion, with her inviting him over for dinner. And just before leaving, Josh is also greeted by a vision of Elise, who imparts hopeful words of a bright future for both him and Dalton. Upon returning to Dalton's room, while his son had neglected to put a picture of him up on his wall earlier, Josh is overjoyed to find a new painting of him carrying the young Dalton out of the Further. The story concludes with an emotional, long overdue hug between father and son, a full stop to the roller coaster of fear, torment, and familiar reconciliation. Of course, the studio made sure that we got another post-credit scene, implying the red-faced demon was still trying to break out.
The balance of light and dark is what we're after. Draw an experience that defines you. And let's see what light we can find.
While there are a few adrenaline-pumping jump scares, Wilson shows a preference for a slow-burning build-up of tension and psychological horror. You can tell he understands the characters and themes well, but the script struggles with pacing issues, taking too long to build momentum, with scarcely any horror in the first half. With that said, The Red Door offers an authentic portrayal of the Lambert family's journey after Chapter 2. It's no shock that the marital and familial bonds frayed after such an event, with Renee being forced to act as though it never transpired due to the hypnotism-induced memory loss. It's also understandable why Josh and Dalton have a strained relationship, having suppressed a profound shared experience and both harboring suspicion about the missing pieces of their memories. Simply ignoring the past doesn't protect Josh and Dalton from the Further, nor does it save the family from crumbling under the burden of hidden trauma and deception. Instead, their survival depends on facing these challenges directly, and the film competently explores these profound themes. Themes aside though, the narrative felt somewhat sparse for a direct sequel to the first two films that were filled with unrelenting dread.
One of the special qualities of the Insidious franchise is it starts in such a very real place with this young family, but ultimately I just want them to be scared to death.
For a large part of the film, we're given more of a drama than horror, as Dalton adjusts to college life and Josh delves into his family history upon discovering a lineage of mental illness. Both Wilson and Simpkins are a collective tour de force, dealing with the sins of the father and the torment that their gift bestows upon them. Amid all the spectral shenanigans, the crux of the Red Door lies in their relationship, and this is mirrored in the editing, which cuts between their perspectives throughout. The only problem is that this relegates Rose Byrne's Renee, Astor's Foster, and Callie to the margins in what is essentially a cameo. This oversight was somewhat disheartening, given the essence of the series was family. It was just a bit disjointing to only see the Lamberts on screen together for the funeral at the very beginning. Instead of having everyone come together at the end, the revelation that Dalton was okay came to the Lamberts by telephone. For what is a send-off to the Lamberts, it didn't make sense not to have them together for one shot at the end. Still, unlike Chapters 3 and 4, which both featured some questionable acting, The Red Door is a return to form with terrific performances from the entire cast. Byrne and Astor, though only in a few scenes, were terrific, showcasing the weight of their familial turmoil and fracturing ties. Hiam Abbass is also solid as the art teacher that sends him down the path of self-discovery, while Sinclair gives a passable performance as Chris, offering a touch of warmth as the only person Dalton relates to at college. As far as scares go though, the film offers a mixed bag, with some incredibly well-executed scenes such as the MRI sequence. However, there's a strange overexposure of the entities, as if they're too brightly lit, resulting in us becoming uncomfortably aware of the actors' makeup. Not to mention the fact that the frights are predominantly reserved for the climactic battle, which becomes more sentimental amidst the mayhem. The red-faced demon, once capable of sending chills down my spine, has now lost much of its frightening impact with increasing visibility and motion, and the fact that he kept appearing in every damn post-credit scene. Blumhouse, sometimes less is more. I was also a bit disappointed that the broader Insidious lore remained largely unexplored, with no attempt to expand on what James Wan and Leigh Whannel did in Chapter 1 and 2. In the end, Insidious the Red Door is a franchise finale that, much like its predecessors, doesn't fully realise its potential. The Red Door might not be the scariest installment, but its personal touch ensures the Lambert saga ends on an emotionally resonant note. With that said, that's all for today, folks. A huge thanks to everyone that requested we explore the entire Insidious timeline. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the series and the Red Door, so please share them in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and if there's anything else you'd like for me to cover, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
My brain's been foggy past few years. I'm gonna need you to remain as still as possible.